Okay, there we go. Well, hi, everyone. I am Gabrielle Gatto. I'm the coordinator of public programs here at the Greenwood Cemetery. I help run the death education programs, which you're at one right now. We've got Dr. Susan Fox with us tonight and Dr. Preeti Sagal. I'm really excited. We did this program a year ago as well. We've done it a few times in person and virtually. I don't know. I think this is something that we do need to talk about more, which is why I'm so happy to see over 42 of you in the Zoom room with us tonight. But I'm going to go ahead and monitor the chat for any questions, because we will do a Q&A at the end. And if you have, any questions, you could directly message me as well. If you would like the recording, it will be available to you. You'll just be able to shoot me an email and I'll put that in the chat as well. But without further ado, Dr. Fox, if you want to kick us off for the night, and you'll hear from me later.
Okay, I am Susan Fox. I'm the founder of Parksville Parents, and educating people about death, and especially kids. It comes personally for me. I lost my father when I was 14. That was the first death that I had ever known, and it was just wasn't done so well. And so now I feel like there needs to be more education around how to help people help their kids know. I mean, you see the death count on a John Wick movie, but you don't. I as a mother now go, how many of those death counts on John Wick, those mothers then have to bury their sons? I guess there's some daughters there too. But we've been working with Greenwood Cemetery. We have these wonderful stroller tours. Some of you may have been to the stroller tours when you first had kids. And we have just been trying to foster this relationship. Greenwood has some great remembrance days, and they have lots of fun concerts and things like that. But I'm just always excited to work with Gabrielle and Amy Cunningham, who is a funeral director, and also Rachel and Gabrielle. I'll let you talk about Rachel later. If you want to get more involved, have your child come to Greenwood for a field trip, things like that. We also have been talking about maybe doing a death cafe, and that is where we would bring kids together in a situation to talk about death. So we would do that very mindfully, but we'll keep that in mind, and we'll bring that up at the end. I'm going to turn it over to Preeti, because I can talk all day.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we go to kick over to the next slide. I think you'd put that one up, Susan, about wanting to, and we will circle back to this at the end, but we'd love to hear from people throughout, and we'll do the Q&A at the end to understand a little bit more about what are some of your first memories of death, and also wanting to, one of the things that, as we were discussing prior to logging on today before everyone joined us, was some of the cultural differences that go along with how people process and grieve and honor the dead. And so we certainly would love to hear from you. Feel free to put it. I see Susan has put the question in the chat, and please feel free to share that if you're comfortable doing so. And we'll kind of review those at the Q&A in the end, or we can do that now too, if you prefer, Susan.
Yeah, if people, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not from Brooklyn, it would also be great to know how old your children are, to just give us a sense of that as well.
Yeah. See, principal. Someone lost a principal. Anybody else have any?
And if you haven't, that's great too.
Yep. Death of a pet. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Elderly neighbors. Yeah.
Oh. Wow. The Challenger accident. I remember that.
I remember that one too.
Mm-hmm.
Piers, dance teacher. parent.
Preeti, what is your first memory?
You know, I have my first memory of I would say was grandfather. And it was very abstract to me because my grandfather was living in India. And so I never really, I'm sorry, great grandfather actually. And so I never really met him because it was when I was very young. But I sort of remember the news arriving, my father reacting to the news, the house being very quiet. And the phone kind of ringing, because again, this was international and at different at late hours, depending on how things were going. So that's one of my more first personal memories. The Challenger is also a big one too. I remember having to talk about that in school. And then I had lost a grandparent before I was born. So there was always the discussion of that in the abstract sense, because my paternal grandfather, I did not get a chance to know him. He passed away before I was born. And so that was something that is, again, as a concept, I knew of, because as soon as I could kind of wonder where one of my grandparents was, my parents had to explain that to me. Seems like we have a lot of various memories. Okay. Okay, thank you, Susan. So I've structured this in a sort of a general considerations way, but then I've carved out a little time for kind of going through age groups and some of the differences that we see based on kids' age. And so again, at the end, we're available for Q&A, and I'm going to encourage Susan and Gabrielle, please feel free to chime in at any point if you have things to add. There's a lot to cover here, and there's a lot and a little to cover, because I feel like there's some key points at the end I'll summarize that I think you can walk away with. But and every child is different, and every circumstance is different, whether based on how close the child is to the person they're losing, or that they've lost, and the circumstances around the death. And so we do our best today to just kind of touch on some main themes, but we can appreciate that everybody's unique experience is unique. And so if there are questions at the end, please feel free to ask. And certainly, as Gabrielle said, I know after last year's talk, we all received, sometimes questions via email from people that had maybe more specific questions, or maybe things that they didn't feel comfortable sharing in a larger forum. And, I'm happy to do that again. And I'm sure I speak for Susan and Gabrielle that they would be as well. So some of this stuff might sound like common sense, but you'd be surprised at how hard it is when we are under stress, and when people are uncomfortable with the topic, which is really how it is with death and dying. So the first thing that we say is be honest and encourage questions. So many of us, we consider sort of trying to keep painful truths, such as the death of a loved one, hidden from children in order to protect them. And in practice, though, this really can only serve to typically prolong a period of uncertainty and anxiety in children. As I'm sure a lot of people here know, they have a keen ability to pick up on subtle emotional changes or shifts in adults and at home and in the environment around them. And so by sort of avoiding telling them what's going on, we actually sometimes add to the confusion and fear by doing that. You want to let them know that any feeling that they have is okay. As anybody, it sounds like a lot of people here have experienced the death of somebody they know and the loss of a loved one. And we know that grief is a very complicated and non-linear process, and there's a lot of emotions that come with that. And we want them to know that any emotion that they have, any feeling that they have, is okay. When we're talking to them, we want to follow their lead. The kinds of questions and concerns that children have can be very different from those from adults. Sometimes giving children too much information can overwhelm them. It's usually best to let them ask questions and then answer in the best and kind of most developmentally appropriate way you can. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And when I say developmentally appropriate language, there's some key points that I think apply to kids of all ages. First is we really want to be kind of direct. We want to use the words like death or dead or died, rather than euphemisms. We want to avoid phrases like things like passed away or they're gone or we've lost them. Kids tend to be very literal, and this kind of fuzzy language can kind of leave them feeling anxious or scared or confused. Or conversely, especially in young children, may lead them to believe that the deceased will come back and that death is not permanent. Depending on the age of the child, children can benefit from having the cause of death explained to them. It can be done again in simple and clear language and developmentally appropriate, and we'll talk about that. Because there's a risk that if children are not given a clear explanation, again, they may not understand the permanence of it. They may blame themselves. They might engage in kind of magical thinking, and I will talk a little bit more about that in a little bit too. And when we do talk to them about death, it's sometimes helpful to link it to any previous experiences that they've had, such as, I know that this was mentioned in the chat, the death of a pet or even the death of a plant. And it's important that the child has the opportunity to talk about death in order for us to facilitate their understanding of it, and that it's irreversible, that it's universal, and that it has a cause. Especially because if you think about, video games or cartoons, they often portray death as a temporary state, and that can be very confusing for young kids, especially. You want to remember that every child reacts differently, and children also tend to react in a more sporadic way than adults. So for kids, some will cry, some will ask questions, others might not seem to react at all. They might go back to playing the game that they were doing or whatever activity, and that's okay. Again, we don't want to judge their reaction. We don't want to assume that they're not processing it. It's just really that they might be processing it in different ways, and they also might show at different emotions at different times. And so it's okay to just offer them hugs or reassurance, to be with them, and just sort of create a space where you can let them know that, one, their feelings are okay, and two, you're available to answer any questions when and if they're ready. You might find with younger kids, especially, they will ask the same questions repeatedly. And this is normal. It's, sometimes I've had people be like, are they in denial? Are they not accepting? They're not adults. They're not like us, right? It's just like the same reason why a young kid might ask you why bubblegum is pink 20 times again. They're going to ask the same questions over and over again. And the best thing you can do is just really answer the same questions simply and consistently every time. It's not because it's not some sort of deep unconscious thing that they're not getting. It's very developmentally appropriate for them to do that, the same way they might ask the same questions, why, as we all know, over and over again. They're going to do that about this too. They don't process the same way as adults. And I think it's important to keep in mind that we're not sort of projecting some of our adult complexities onto them. And as I mentioned, they will be much more sporadic, I think, in how they experience, hearing the news that someone has died. They can, like I said, they can be very happy in one moment, sad in another, unreactive, and sometimes this can seem a bit distressing or upsetting to adults, especially if they don't react or they seem unfazed by it. But it's actually quite normal. And again, it might just take some time for them to digest. And this is where, again, the repeated questions come in and the repeated check-ins, which I'll talk about as we move forward. But it doesn't mean that they don't care or that they're not processing it, but it's a very typical reaction for kids. And especially for young kids, don't be surprised if young children are really mostly concerned about themselves. It's how they are. So for a young child, if they hear of the death of a loved one or a death of someone they know, their first question might be like, well, who's going to teach me? I think someone said a dance class. Who's going to be my new dance teacher? Who's going to pick me up from school? Who's going to play my board game with me? Those will be the kinds of questions, and that's very age appropriate for them. The world sort of begins and ends with them, and so that's how they're sort of processing the death of somebody. Maintaining routines for, again, this is for all age groups as much as possible. And I know that this is hard depending on the nature of the circumstance, and who it is that may have died, but as much as you can, you want to maintain the routines. Grief takes time. Anybody who's experienced that knows, and children really benefit from the security of regular routines, knowing that life goes on. If you can't maintain routines, it's always helpful to expect them to know help them to know what to expect. So if it means like a change in their life, you might want to head off any worries or fears by explaining what will happen. For example, Aunt Sarah will be picking up from school instead of grandma. Or it might just even mean changes in the house. If there's been the death of a loved one, perhaps relatives are coming to visit and will be staying in their room, or going to be in the house. These are things you want to prepare them for. Or as anybody is also happens as in the death of extended family, we might need to travel. And so if a parent needs to be away for an extended period, it's good to let them know who will be staying with them, who will be, how will you be keeping in touch? And let it be very specific. I'll FaceTime you every day. I'll be back on this day. You can make things like a little calendar. So it's not just about, somebody close to them, but sometimes the death of somebody in their orbit can really change other routines that aren't, quite as, maybe not quite as impactful as, let's say, the loss of a parent or someone very close to them. But these are the things that we want them to know, and help them prepare so we can, again, maintain the routine as much as possible. It's okay to let them know how you're feeling within reason. Sometimes I think we try to protect or shelter kids by attempting to hide our own sadness or grief. But kids, as I mentioned earlier, they invariably know that something is wrong, especially if it's a parent or loved one or sibling. And if they don't know what's going on, they might feel alone or confused. And also sometimes hiding your own grief might make them feel like they can't express their sadness, or that their own feelings might be strange or odd. So it's okay to, let them know that you're feeling sad, that you're tearful, that you're missing somebody. You don't need to let them see you at your most upset moments, because we don't want them to start to worry about you, and how you're coping. But it's okay to be honest with how you're feeling, and it's a way to model for them that all different emotions are okay, and that also sharing those emotions is okay. And the whole cycle of the things. Sometimes I feel sad, but then I'm thinking of a good memory and I'll be laughing. And then sometimes I'll feel sad again. It's okay to model that cycle for them. And also just keeping in mind that, as a parent or a caregiver, that, if you're grieving the loss of somebody significant, that one of the best ways you can do to help your child is also ensure that you're taking care of yourself too. And that's sometimes how you can provide, if you're giving yourself space for your own grief, to process it, that's just as important, and allows you to help do that for your children. And another big thing is as time passes, or even in general, we don't want to avoid mentioning the person who died. We want to share those stories and memories. Remembering is a part of grieving. It's a part of healing. And you can help your child remember that person. You can, it can be as simple as sharing memories of the person who died, or just even bringing up their name, so that your child knows it's not taboo, to not mention that person, that it's okay to say their name, to talk about them. If you're comfortable, you can keep photos around. For older kids in the days and weeks ahead, you might want to encourage them to draw pictures or write down their favorite stories, to help help, them make memories of their loved one. Recalling and sharing memories, helps heal grief and activate positive feelings for the person that has died. And like for all of us, I was about to say, give your child time to heal from a loss, but give everybody time to heal from a loss. Grief is a process that happens over time, and it fluctuates. As I said, it's very nonlinear for kids and adults. And so it's, we want to keep having conversations about to check in with your child about how they're feeling, how they're doing. Healing doesn't mean forgetting about the loved one. It means remembering the person with love, and letting loving memories, stir good feelings. And so it's okay to keep checking in with them, at various points, because again, it is a nonlinear process. Susan or Gabrielle, is there anything you want to add before I move on?
I think that was brilliant and a lot. And I
Okay.
think one of the things that's really hard is, and this comes from a friend of mine who just passed, and her son is about my age. She was a lot older, but holding space for yourself to grieve and still comforting your child. It's hard. It can be really, really hard. And for those of you who might not be on Parksville Parents, we have a motherless mothers group, and know that there are things that will come up as you have a child. And we also have a meetup of fatherless fathers. And so parenting adds this whole other layer to grief. But even taking a walk in Greenwood Cemetery or Prospect Park and just letting yourself feel those things. And my friend spent a lot of time while his mother was dying in the shower crying because he didn't feel comfortable being, too falling apart in front of his child. He did some of it, but that was his private space. So for what that is. Moving on.
So I wanted to kind of go through some of the age groups, in case, some of these are currently going on, or depending on what the age of your children are. And again, please, Gabrielle and Susan, please chime in if there's anything you want to add. And again, as Susan said, this is a lot. So I know it's it's a lot, and it isn't, right? Because it's so hard to cover everything. But I just, I think the takeaway from this is that is always to kind of keep in mind the age of a child, and what, again, a lot of times I think when it comes to death and to a lot of complex things in life, we have to remind ourselves that kids are kids, and we're adults, and they don't process things maybe with the level of complexity or abstractness that we do, especially for young kids. So along those lines, starting with the 0 to 2-year-olds, and zero, oh, I can't believe we're talking about babies, but yes, we are talking about babies, because infants can grasp that adults in their life are sad or angry. They can't understand perhaps the concept of death, but they do pick up on those changes that we've mentioned. And so they can experience potentially feelings of pain and loss. They may search repeatedly, as I put in the last bullet point, for the deceased. They may need to be told repeatedly that the person will not be returning. And these are very appropriate reactions for them. And they typically don't understand the abstract concept of death, nor do they necessarily understand the permanence of it. So they usually need a lot of repetition and reminders. They cuddles and hugs, and potentially, again, being told repeatedly that a person's not returning. And it's important for this age group, especially, that special memories and photographs are kept for them as they grow older, to help them learn about the person that they've lost, especially since they may not remember that many things. And as I said, on the first slide, but again, especially for this age, a consistent routine is really, really important. Okay. Anything else, Gabrielle or Susan? 2 to 5-year-olds also at this age also typically lack a real understanding of death and the permanence of it. They're very present oriented, and they may not really understand that death means forever. They may see, death as reversible, non-permanent, and they may invent sort of magical theories as to what causes death, or believe that their their actions can impact outcomes. And so, sometimes they may need to be told that people die for a variety of reasons, but not because of anything we say or do. This age also may ask the same questions over and over again, and we want to just be patient and consistent and reassuring. And we want to provide honest and brief answers to their questions. And again, lots of reassurance and affection. And also, when I say those honest, brief answers, we want to be this, especially at this age, kids tend to think much more literally. So use of language is extremely important. They, statements such as like, we've lost him or her, or they've gone away, or they've passed. Those can be very confusing for them. So really, really keeping the language simple and using words like death and dead, and relaying the importance that person wouldn't be coming back is important at this age. And also for this age, maintaining routines is important as well. And especially at this age, their play will often be an outlet for their grieving. And so you might see those behaviors come up in their play. And again, those range of emotions that might be happy in 1 minute, sad, aggressive, and that's all very understandable and typical, and for it to fluctuate. But you'll see a lot of it in their play. Okay.
Preeti, I would say one of my professors died of a brain tumor, and I babysat their kids a lot, and they were in the 2 to 5 year old range, and they said, "Well, don't worry, Daddy's watching over you." And they were extremely, that was a concrete word. I'm in my bed, they're watching me. He's watching me at night. He's watching me, and it wasn't a comforting thing. It was a creepy thing.
Yeah.
So whether or not you use certain language, kind of step back and say, how can this magical saying actually backfire? And that's just a good example of one that did.
Right. And we certainly want to be, we want you to embrace whatever cultural or religious values or aspects that might provide your own, might support your own grief process. But again, I think with kids, we also just want, we have to understand that they might take those things literally. And so I think if you do use that language, then being explicit in terms of what that means to you. And this is where also, so many different people in life are helpful around helping to explain things in a developmentally appropriate way. Whether it's a pastor or a rabbi, anyone in your, a mom who might be able to, who knows how to kind of maybe embrace some of a death doula. I see Gabrielle has mentioned. There's people who really can, I think, take those values and that are important to you and relay them in a way, help you come up with the language to relay that in a way to the children that won't be so confusing or creepy as Susan just said, but also provide, have the ultimate intent, which is to provide comfort. And, that goes along the lines with a lot of things. And again, we couldn't cover everything in this talk, but I come from a medical background. And so much of the work that we did, I was in a pediatric cancer center, was really working with families on not even just around the bereavement or death and dying, but even just around explaining diagnosis. We had so many tools to be able to talk about what a diagnosis meant, and pictures and books and different arts and crafts that we would, use to explain things like blood disorders. And there are people out there that, specific to whatever might be going on, like a brain tumor, to use Susan's example, that can help guide you on how to, what kind of language around those specific issues would be good for a child. One thing I didn't mention, I can't remember, I didn't put this on the slide, but another thing to consider with this age too is that they tend to have sometimes brief but kind of intense responses, and it's not uncommon for kids in this age group to really kind of regress to earlier behaviors too. So things like thumb sucking may reemerge, bedwetting, sleep problems, irritability, confusion, and again, those regression to some of those younger behaviors can happen in this age group, and it's not uncommon, and we work through it the same way you worked through it when they had had those issues when they were younger. But again, a lot of it is just reassurance and providing support, and recognizing that sometimes those things are going to be just temporary. Right, 5 to 8 years. So this is where we get a little bit more variable. Kids in this age groups, especially in the younger end, may still see death as reversible, but kids at the older end usually understand that death is irreversible. They may ask kids at this age, because they're getting more knowledgeable, they may ask frequent questions about death, and they might become preoccupied with thoughts of death. They might want to understand what happened. They might, especially for this age, let's say it's the loss of a grandparent, they may begin to worry about their own parent. Could this happen to you? And so they tend to need a lot more explanation, again, within an age-appropriate day. In an age-appropriate way, and they might need a little bit more explanation around. I see someone say, my 5-year-old asked if she will die too because her great-grandmother died, and so this is where, again, they might become, because they do understand more, but not but necessarily don't have that complexity or have that maturity. They might ask a lot of very specific questions, which sometimes can be disarming. But again, answering these questions honestly and directly. And yes, I see someone wrote, we have some of this too. Will you die? Will dad? Who will take care of me? And these are very kind of age appropriate things that you'll see at this age. And again, if we stick with the idea of being direct and honest, and then helping to explain if there was a cause for somebody's death, what that was, why that's different from you or another individual in their life. They also, they may engage in some magical thinking or believe that somehow they caused the death as well. So it's also, again, important to be direct and honest about what you share with them, and answer those questions, as I said, openly and honestly in that bullet point. You can, it's also for them at this age, they may experience things like nightmares, regression to younger behaviors as well, changes in sleeping and eating, aggressive play. These are all understandable reactions to kids in this for kids in this age group. They may even attempt to take on the role of the person who died in a very childlike way. If a person was somebody who played a certain game, then they might try to take on that role. I'm going to do this, or I'm going to help with this because that's what so and so used to do. We want to encourage their expression of their feelings verbally, but also through various outlets, drawing, stories, talking about the person who died. Kids at this age engage in a lot of symbolic play, and that's okay for them to do that. It's also sometimes a good way to also help explain concepts to them. And once we get to this age group too, we want to make sure that, depending on how close the person is to them and how they're processing it, it's sometimes worthwhile to make sure that, their people in their school are aware, whether it's their teacher or school staff, just because, again, they might start to exhibit some behavioral changes at school, or have trouble focusing, or feel different than their peers. And we want to keep an eye on that, especially if it's the loss of a close loved one, like a parent. Anything else you want to add, Susan or Gabrielle? I know that you guys were putting some stuff in the chat.
Yeah, we've had a lot of these questions come up on Parksville Parents. My mother died, and now my child is worried that I'm going to die, and they, so what we've done is compile the answers that people have given to those, and so those I'm just putting in, and we'll send these out later as part of the resources.
Right.
But
yeah, there's just so many. There's only so much we could cover today, but I think, yeah, some of these resources are great. And the one thing I guess I also want parents to take away is, if your child starts asking you those questions, that is a perfectly normal and healthy response. And it's part of how, we learn about all sorts of concepts in the world, how we sort of learn about a concept, and then we make differentiation between, the different nuances of it. And this is what they're doing with the concept of death. And so it's understandable understandable. And so the thing, sometimes when kids will ask those questions, the knee jerk might be to be like, oh, you don't need to worry about that, or I'm not going to go anywhere anytime soon. And that's what we kind of want to try to avoid, because that can indirectly send them the signal that they shouldn't ask the question again, or we're not really helping them understand the concept of death in that case. And so, and I'm sure I've done it in the past too, and it's just a knee jerk. And so sometimes when kids ask those questions, it just makes us a little anxious inside, and so, remember that's our anxiety. It's not theirs. They're just sort of asking a matter of fact question, like, why is the sky blue? And so we have to look at it that way. And one thing I also like to tell parents is you can always buy time. It's not normal to walk around prepared to answer questions about death, right? That's not how most people want to live their lives. So if a child asks you a valid question, it's okay to say, that's a really good question. I can see why you might be worried about that. And I want to make sure I answer that in a way that helps you understand it. So let me think about that. Can we, and come back to it a little bit later. You understandably will not be always prepared to answer these questions. And so you can buy yourself a little bit of time, but in that statement, what you're telling your child in that moment by saying, that's a really good question. I want to answer that. I think Susan's let me come back to that later, is you're telling them that the question they've asked is okay. You can handle it, that it's a safe space, and that you are listening to them. And that's really what they need in those moments more than anything, and that what you've now done is create a space where they know they can keep sharing and asking questions. And that's what you want more than anything, than always having the perfect answer, because there's going to be plenty of times we don't have the perfect answer. I'm a psychologist and do this for a living. And sometimes I have to think about what I'm going to say too, or I have to go back to it later and say, you asked me something and I want to kind of revisit this because I'm not sure that I said everything that I should have said. It's okay to do that. We're human. And what you're doing is giving them the signal that it's okay to talk about these things. And that's what you want more than anything. Okay. 8 to 12. So a lot of the same things here, but at this age, obviously, they really typically understand the physical aspects of death and its finality. And because of that, they tend to ask pretty specific questions, and they might have a desire for detail. They also, because they're at an age where they're taking in more of others, they might also be concerned for how others are responding to death. They might want to know about what the right way is to respond, how to grieve. And so they're really beginning to have really more of the ability to mourn and to understand and recognize mourning in others. Communication sometimes, though, because they might understand more, but they still obviously don't have the sophistication and how to communicate about it. Their grief may come in the form of things like physical aches and pains. And they also might have concerns about their own health, thoughts about their own death, their parents, if it wasn't the loss of a parent, and really kind of helping to differentiate, even like you would with the previous group, what are the differences in terms of causes, what happened, why it's different from somebody else. But again, they do start to really understand the finality of death, the universality of death, and mortality. And so for them to become a little bit preoccupied with that and ask a lot of questions, and very specific questions, is not uncommon for kids in this age group. They also, some of the behaviors they may exhibit is some of the more challenging behaviors. So again, I keep saying this phrase, but regressing to younger behaviors, behaviors that are typical of younger children. They might exhibit more school problems, have trouble focusing, following through with homework. They might also start to feel maybe different than their peers. So they might have some social difficulty, or they might withdraw from friends or act out. They might start to become kind of concerned again with their own body and their own health. And so this is where, again, being open and honest, and also involving, collaborative partners like their school, to keep an eye on them, especially again, if it's the loss of somebody very close to them, so that we can monitor for any changes in their behavior in school, socially, academically. And you know, they're also at an age where they might you know, need reassurance about changes in lifestyle. They're maybe starting to be at an age where they might worry about things like finances or housing situation if it's a parent, or changes that they're going to understand some of the changes that might accompany the loss of somebody significant in their life. And again, for this age, same thing again, we don't want to avoid talking about death or answering questions. They really, I think at this age, need an opportunity to talk to a trusted adult, and they really need that opportunity to know that that adult isn't afraid of them asking those questions, and isn't avoiding, you know, isn't avoidant of asking those questions. And again, this is where you might not always have the perfect answer, but you can always buy time. But you want to create a space where they know it's okay to ask and to talk about it, and and um, and be open with how they're feeling. And also at this age too, they can, it's great to encourage them to talk, but it's also okay to give them some alone time too. You want to be present, but you don't have to be on top of them. And so allowing them a little bit of own time to, you know, to process is all right as well. Susan or Gabrielle, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll just say I was, you know, like just turning 8 around 9/11, and had an uncle that was in the fire department. And, you know, there was a lot of questions I had, and I did want details.
Mhm.
And I think I remember a time, you know, my mom didn't want to bog me down with the details, but I actually found a great deal of comfort in them. So I would ask, I would, you know, be like, no, I want to hear if we heard from Uncle Vinny today or not, or, you know, what's
Mhm.
going on. So, yeah, I will say, because I do remember very vividly how my brain was working at that time. Um, you know, I wanted that. And then I was communicating that, even if it was messy and hard. And then I saw, you know, and witnessed my parents and my family kind of feel a little sticky about it, but then finally give in,
Mhm.
you know, and be like, all right, fine. Like, we'll give you details in the most appropriate way that they saw fit. Um,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
yeah, that's
And
what
and that's the thing, is they will ask a lot of questions and specific questions. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to give like a, you know, a dissertation for an answer. Like you can just add, you know, sometimes they have the attention span of like, you know, 30 seconds. So like it can be a simple answer, but it has to be a direct and clear one. You know, it doesn't have to be the ins and out, but something that answers the question. Um, all right, so the next slide, our teens, woo, they're tough. Teenagers are, you know, are particularly vulnerable at this stage because they really, at this age group, they try to solve problems themselves. And as we know, with teens, they might find it difficult to seek help and support from adults, particularly parents. And it's hard because they understand the concept of death, but they still don't have the emotional maturity to deal with it. Even the most mature teen, they're still a teen, right? And so you know, I think it's one thing to you know, we want to encourage them to talk, but we also know that it's pretty normal for teenagers and adolescents to have difficulty talking to parents. And so we want to give them the opportunity to talk to a trusted adult or peers and encourage them to talk, if not to you, but to friends or a teacher or even a therapist if you feel it warrants that. School and other activities, you know, can provide some security, but they might feel isolated or different from their peers, given again the nature of the death and who it was, and depending on, you know, how their grief is manifesting, they might feel overwhelmed by exams or coursework, and so you know, these are things we want to keep an eye on, and again, this is where partnerships with schools and other people in their life are really important, especially because teens tend to be a little bit more closed off in terms of communication. I think we want to allow them the space to mourn and respect their need to kind of grieve in their own way. And again, it's sort of being present, but not being in their face constantly. Checking in is okay. Saying, you know, I'm here if you want to talk about it. These are all ways to let them know that you're there and you're present, but also even giving them the opportunity to talk to someone else if you feel it warrants that, because you're letting them know that you're want them to be able to process it in whatever way is most comfortable for them. They might, though, again, depending on the nature of the loss, they might exhibit more extreme emotional or behavioral changes that we might typically see from young adults or adults. Some denial, some regression, maybe risk taking, acting out, and so these are things also. This is where. This is where some of that emotional immaturity comes in, because these are some of the ways they may react, and even though they might have the cognitive ability to really understand the death and what has happened and the permanence of it. We want to, I think, not try to attempt to make it all better for them or dismiss their grief, but allow them to more be available, but, respect their need to grieve in their own way. We want to, I think, also avoid burdening them with adult responsibilities or expectations. So I think as kids get older, we want to, we sometimes hear these phrases like "be strong for your mom and dad," or I think we referenced this one before, "you're the man of the house now," things like that. I mean, again, we really still want to acknowledge that they're still a child, and we don't want to put adult responsibilities onto them and make them feel overwhelmed or burdened with that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but adolescents, can often need a choice with regard to funeral and subsequent life changes. And so, how they want to be involved. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and Gabrielle will. But teens are a difficult one. And so, this is where I often find that if you feel like you need outside support, because if they're not engaging with you, or if they're isolating or withdrawing, it's a helpful thing for them. Gabrielle or Susan, anything you want to add?
I'll throw in another personal experience. So, my uncle had died when I was 13, and I remember my great uncle rather, and I remember going to school and telling one of my friends, and they were like, "Okay, it's your great uncle. What's the big deal?" So I do think this is a really important time as well to talk about like family structure, and that families look differently, right? So my family, like the great patriarch, it was like, this big part of our family, had died, where other families, maybe they'd only met their great uncle once, or, didn't have a relationship. So I was pretty confused about how to grieve, and I didn't feel like my grief was necessarily valid. But then once I spoke to my crazy large Italian family, I had realized, oh, okay, wow, like I can be so grateful that this particular relationship, some people don't even get to form a bond with them, but I had. So school had become this interesting space where I got to teach and also like learn about those social dynamics when it came to a loss around this age.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think sometimes when these things happen too, helping kids also understand how other people's reactions might not be different. It might not be as supportive as they need, or even helping them understand that sometimes when we share things like this with other people, they get uncomfortable, they don't know the right thing to say, and so yeah, that can also, again, points to how sometimes kids at this age particularly can feel isolated from their peers if if their peers can't really appreciate what they're going through, if they haven't had an experience like this.
I would also add to what Gabrielle said, and my father-in-law died, and he was older, and he had some dementia, and he wasn't very interactive with my girls, who were 16 and 15, or 16 and 14 at the time. But most recently, a close friend who was only 48 died. And this was somebody we've spent Thanksgiving together. So even if it's a family member, that might not be as impactful as somebody who they spent more time with. And I'm going to be devastated when one of my cats dies, because my one daughter is so attached. So don't belittle any loss. And even I was having a conversation with somebody today, and there's lots of different kinds of loss, and it's not necessarily death. But if you had a nanny, if your family has had a nanny, and the nanny goes off and gets another job, there can be, you know, a lot of feelings of grief and loss because they're not around anymore. So just understanding
100%.
that grief is not just death, grief is not just people, grief is not just somebody that's in your family.
That's true. Very, very true. Very, very true. Okay. So then the next slide, if you wouldn't mind moving us forward, Susan. So, and this is where I'm going to cover a few things. I'm going to hand it over to Gabrielle. Preparing for funeral and services, you know, it's beneficial for children to have the choice to attend services. You know, the funeral is an opportunity, or whatever services you may have, for family and friends to say goodbye to a person they loved. And it's good to give children that choice to attend and how they want to be involved in the service, but again, important not that they feel burdened with responsibilities. You know, if they attend, you know, we want to have them to have access to a trusted adult who can answer questions and be supportive. You know, in some situations, this might be an aunt or uncle or someone who's not in the immediate family who might be maybe more available to answer the child's questions while a funeral is in progress. I think of an example, you know, when my uncle passed away, and my cousin, who's a bit older than me, had, you know, elementary and middle school age daughters at the time. And obviously her and her sibling and my aunt were very involved with the services, and of course visiting, you know, visiting with all the people who attended. And so I was really charged with being with her daughters for the day. And I think that was an important thing, because I was sort of their person to answer questions, to just even get things that they needed, but that they had this trusted adult who they could talk to, or even cry to, or ask questions, or, you know, one of them just wanted me to like fix her shoe, things like that. And those types of things will be important. If you know, providing careful preparation of what to expect and what they will be seeing during the services. So, you know, and what that might look like. You know, for many people, even adults, sometimes these types of events these types of events are the first time they're experiencing it. And so for children, you know, as much as we can prepare them about what it will look like, what the room will look like, particularly if in certain funerals, if it's an open casket, we want to give them the choice of seeing the body. And if we are doing that, we want to give them careful preparation for such an event. You know, descriptions of the coffin, the room, the body, what to expect, what it'll look like. And again, we want them to have access to a trusted adult that they can ask questions or express emotions, or any reservations or fears. We want, you know, some children might need permission to touch the body or not want to, or that they may express that they may not want to. They may want to put a letter or a drawing or a favorite toy in the coffin. And, you know, Gabrielle will touch on that with some of the things that she's seen in her work. And if your child does attend, it's okay to invite them to participate in the services, and have a role in how, giving them a choice in how they want to participate. You know, having sometimes a small active role can help kids master unfamiliar emotions, and maybe like feel, you know, help them manage a very emotional situation. You know, you might invite them to read a poem, or pick a song to be played. It doesn't have to be something that requires them to kind of do something in front of other people. So if they don't read the poem, maybe they pick a poem or scripture that's read, or they pick some of the music, or they help select photos that might be displayed in a memorial, or hung up. and again, they might want to make something that's displayed or to put inside a coffin. And so giving them these choices of how to take part, and, if they want to take part, and how allows them to be a part of the process without overwhelming what they might be emotionally ready for. And Gabrielle, I know you have some slides coming up that just shows some of the things that you've done with the kids, if you want to add to this and take it from here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it kind of what you were getting at, like, these are some great pictures. These are alternative containers, kind of cardboard caskets,
Mhm.
primarily used for cremation. And this is a great way, even if, if there's a viewing and the child doesn't necessarily want to go up to the casket, but wants to still engage in ritual, look and research and think about what those ways could be. Here, we see a bunch of kids drawing, coloring, adding photographs, writing messages to the deceased right on the alternative container, the casket there. So there are so many ways to bring people into the process that doesn't necessarily have to look like the normal way. It doesn't have to exactly be, oh, well, the adults, we all go up to the casket and we put the mass card and, whatever. There have been many times where I've been the one at the back greeting all the family that's coming in from all over the world. So, other family members can be at the casket and, be more openly mourning. And, another really great way to bring in kids to it too is I've done intuitive drawing with with my little cousins that, when a family member dies, just processing feelings and things like that. Or, what would you want to say? Like, do you want to say a poem, like you said? Or there are just so many ways. So I just implore everyone to think, I'm outside of the box, but right here, they're thinking on the box. But yeah, I think the next slide has a few pictures as well. But there's so many ways. And yeah, exactly. So interacting with objects or art, or just trying to bring them into the ritual and asking them, right? Saying, all right, what parts of it do you want to be involved in, or which parts of it may be scary for you? My cousin stands firm by this. She did not want to go up to the casket of her father. And, we talked about it recently, and she's like, no, I still had a role at the funeral. And I was asked, like, what do you want to be doing? And she didn't want to go up to the casket, but she did want to interact with people that knew her father. She did want to take a moment and have those moments and greet people and, be the first one at the casket at the cemetery, but wanted out of that part of the ritual. But when she was asked, what can I do? And we provided her options. She was able to say, that feels safe. That seems scary. That feels good. That doesn't feel good.
I think it's
Reed?
also I see the message in the chat. We were asked if we wanted to go to the funeral.
Yeah.
And I would caution, my father was dying of a brain tumor, and we went to go visit him. And as I was going in with my sister, my mother was coming out, and she said, well, he's asleep, so you won't really get to interact with him. And that would have been the last time I saw my father. And for a long, long time, I felt like I should have done that. I should have gone in anyway. Similar to this, I should have been at the funeral. I should have gone, even though I said I wouldn't. And later, I had the opportunity to spend time with a man who was dying of cancer 40 years later. And my decision, or my upset from when I was 17 through until I saw this other man withering away, I changed my mind. I changed my mind. And it turned out that I actually felt like, it was okay not to see him in such a in such a state. So, but I hear you, Nancy, and I feel like, you know, giving the kids option in some cases makes sense. But I like what Gabrielle is saying is maybe there's something that they can do that feels like, you know, putting together a photo album, lighting a candle, so that you're not forcing them to go, but at the same time, you're not also limiting them in the future to feel like they had a part in it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think also, and I saw that one come up too, and I think it's a valid question. And you know, it's hard to cover every permutation of this. You know, I agree that maybe like the question of, do you want to go to the funeral? Anything that's unfamiliar to a child, they're most likely going to say no to, right? Do you want to go to X, Y, or Z? And so I think this is where the clear and the directness is, you know, this is what the purpose of it is. This is, you know, this is going to be, you know, when an adult would say to such young, this is something we're going to be doing to honor daddy's life, and to tell good memories and to say goodbye to him. And so I think that's when it's not just about, do you want to go, yes or no, but it's about sort of explaining to them what it is and then asking them how they want to be involved, you know. So will that be hard for you? Do you want to have a safe space to sit quietly? Who would you like to sit with you at the funeral? So I do agree that yes, at such a young age, that is maybe a hard question for them to answer. To answer that and to kind of pose such a big decision on them. But I think it's not just as simple as saying, do you want to go? I think it's more about really walking them through what it is. And if it's important to a family that they be there, then the choice is really like, how do they want to be involved, right? We do want to respect you know, a parent's or a caregiver's, it's also, you know, desire to do what they feel is best for their child and for the long run, right? And so I think it's a way to just, I think, make a situation that is incredibly emotional and confusing, and hard. And so we want to give them some knowledge about it and some opportunity to find a way to be involved in a way that they're comfortable with. And so it doesn't always have to be as simple as, do you want to go? But, you know, going doesn't necessarily mean staying home and going and be like, do you want to go inside this room? Would you rather wait with somebody here? And, you know, sometimes people can go and say goodbye. You know, family members can go and say goodbye independently, you know, not with everybody. So I think there's a lot of ways to phrase that conversation with options that are within a realm, and then ways to invite them to be a part of the process. But usually I think you overcome that by, again, giving them information about what to expect. I know there were other questions and I don't know. Hello? Is everyone still there?
Yeah, I'm wondering, Gabriella, if you want to go ahead and do some more, and we'll come back to these last questions.
Yeah, sure. I think the next slide is maybe some other books. And then I'm just going to put in the chat here just a quick list of also films that can, you know, help frame and guide conversations about death and grief. But if you want to talk about the books, Doctor.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm sorry if you want to move the slide. I mean, they're just so many things out there that that I think also help explain the concept of grief, because again, you know, we can appreciate that I've used the phrase developmentally appropriate language, and as a neuropsychologist, I can appreciate that that's more like familiar to me. And when in doubt, there's always some really good books out there that can help you along. And so, you know, these are, and again, it doesn't always have to be at times when it's the loss of somebody especially close to them, but you know, there's a lot of opportunities to teach children about loss and death through, again, loss of a plant, a pet. And so these are some titles. There are so many out there, and you know, to sort of help, you know, I think this is a great way for kids to understand some of these concepts. Some of these books are fully available online in their entirety, and there's even like now even some of them there's videos. You know, I know we always just include books because we know that sometimes we want to limit some of the screen time, especially after the pandemic. So we wanted to give some tangible options, and these are some really nice ways to help, you know, introduce this topic and to review this topic. And again, you can always buy time, right? You can say, you know, these are really good questions, and you know, I'm trying to think of the best way to answer them, and so I'm going to get a little help. I'm going to talk to so and so, and you know, when I worked at the hospital, the parents would say, you know, let's go. We're going to go ask Dr. Preety or Dr. So and so to help us answer these questions, or we'd say, you know, I'm going to find us a really good book that we can read together. You know, these are ways to buy yourself time, and again, you're showing them that you're not afraid to necessarily answer the question. Was there, I don't know, Gabrielle, anything you wanted to add, or Susan? I know I wanted to just make sure we had some time. I know there were some questions in the chat that I'm sure I missed along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll also send out, I have something from our death cafes that we usually send out with resources of all kinds. So it includes, you know, these books that we just showed you, certain films, even like yoga for kids for grief, things like that. But yeah, let these things serve as a guide for you, right? Also, you know, the child might gravitate towards a film or a book that deals with it, and they might not totally be processing why. I definitely, Harry Potter got me through some pretty big losses, and I did not understand why probably until a few years ago, where I was like, oh, there was a lot of death. There were a lot of really complex relationships in those books and in those films that did help me internalize and understand and validate my own grief and loss. Another book I'll just show you guys is Preparing to Die by Andrew Holasek, and I'll add that to the list. But there is this one great little section. I'll just read the first paragraph and then we'll move to the Q&A, but it's just on exposing children to death. And it just opens up with, in denying our children the experience of death as a part of life, we cloak it in unnecessary mystique. Death will often remain a mysterious and frightening event, and unknown until we are well into adulthood. Wynne, in his 70s, had never encountered a dead body until his stepmother's passing. He approached her deathbed with trepidation, but was fascinated by the peace he saw on her face. On the second day of her wake, he even brought a camera to take photos, as once was the practice in bygone days. He even read old letters out loud that were comforting to him and her. Many families want to shield their children from death. They fear psychologically damaging them by exposing them to anything unpleasant. This stance applies before as well as after death. They will keep their children away from the patient ravaged by long-term illness and say, I don't want the kids to remember him that way. My views on this issue stem from my own experience growing up with a very sick brother who eventually died at age 9. The elder by 2 years, I witnessed and can recall my brother's suffering and that of my family, but this experience was a profound teaching and unconditional love. Far too often, our society has hidden away its sick, its disabled, and those who are dying. I believe that looking upon these people and looking upon the illness to the human being obscured by an ugly, declining physical body is necessary to cultivate compassion. So it does really pull back to compassion. We're trying to compassionately teach our children what death is, what it looks like, you know, their role in the process. So, you know, also it helps to frame it as a lesson in compassion, not just a lesson in teaching a child what death is. You know, there's some greater themes here as well. So that's all I got.
So, Gabrielle, can you talk a minute about what the Death Cafe is? And I would love to brainstorm with people what I propose to you earlier in the year to do a death cafe that families could join.
Yeah, so a death cafe is really kind of in the spirit of an old European salon. You sit around with a bunch of strangers, drink tea, and talk about ideas about death. There's no agenda. It's really just this open, honest space. John Underwood started in the UK. He himself tragically died at 44 years old. And now there's death cafes in, over 80 countries. It's a social franchise, so anyone can start it. But basically, it's a space where you can explore these ideas really comfortably and eat cookies and drink tea. But yeah, we're hoping to do kind of like a family edition one where we have children and parents and, all kinds of family structures come and kind of talk about what it looks like through that specific lens. So we're hoping to do that in the near future as well.
So I'd love if anybody had some feedback to put in the chat. Would they come to a death cafe that was family oriented to talk about death and how to talk about, in a smart way? I would probably say, and I think Gabrielle, you and I talked about maybe kids 8 and above, and Preeti, I'd love to hear your feedback on that from a developmental point of view, and to just start normalizing death, because at one level, if you hide it away, it becomes this mysterious, scary thing that you're not allowed to do. So yeah. So if anybody is willing to bring their kids in person to such an event, the coconut macaroons are to die for. They come from Baked. But yeah, I think maybe we turn to the questions now. And I love this one from Caitlin about, this is more about death, but I think about dying. What do we help our children understand about dying without traumatizing them, with allowing them to maintain relationships? So I'm the mother of a 3-year-old in Brooklyn. My son's great-grandmother was hospitalized. Their prognosis is poor. They have seen each other frequently and they have a close relationship. We are struggling whether to bring him to the hospital to see her, as it is unlikely she will return home. How do we talk with him about her declining health, knowing that she is dying?
I'm sorry, Susan, were you gonna respond? I didn't mean to interrupt there.
Not at all. I wanted totally you to respond to that.
So, it is a tough one for such a young child. I think if they have a very close relationship, and you are, interested in taking the child to the hospital to see their great grandmother, I think the first thing would be is, and it's hard with 3-year-old, you can't do it too far in advance, but I think prepping them for the environment will be especially important. So, if the great grandmother is not responsive, if there's tubes, if there's machines, I think there's got to be some explanation about what to anticipate, and that, why you're going. So, even though she can't talk to us, we want to see her. We want you to be able to see her. Again, we're not sure, how long she'll be here. I think to try to talk about with a 3-year-old sort of impending death is a bit hard, because again, that concept at such a young age might not be fully apparent to them, especially if you don't have a good sense of how long it might be. And so I think it's okay to be sort of upfront that she's sick and that doctors are taking care of her. I think I would be very present about it. And because of that, she might need this tube to help her breathe. She has this, so that she has this, and because it's giving her water and nutrients. I would be very specific and simple about actualities of what the child will see, and less about the abstract or the future, because I don't feel like a child that young would really be able to appreciate that, especially if you don't have a good sense of what it is. But I think giving the child some of that information about the here and now, then when unfortunately when she does die, then you are able to use some of that information you gave them about the illness and the sickness. And this is where phrases like and I saw this question pop up too, because someone asked about, I think, another kind of 4 or 5-year-old who had asked about when will I die. Kids at that sort of age group, their knowledge of death is I'm always curious to ask kids at that age. It seems like it's normal for kids, I think, at that age to ask a lot of questions. They're in that stage of life where everything's like a why, what's this? They're just wonderfully curious about the world around them. And so I think it's okay to say, it sounds like you might be concerned about dying or death, or and asking them, was there anything that made that pop into their mind? I mean, maybe maybe they heard about a friend's grandparent, maybe they saw a plant. And so I think as you get more into what it is that maybe prompted the question, then you can kind of focus on the specifics of whatever that might be. But I think because at that age, toddlers especially, I think, their knowledge of death kind of is kind of in different categories. They have like, there's the aspect of non-functionality, meaning like somebody's body doesn't work anymore. There's the aspect, I think I mentioned this before, of universality, which is like all living things die, the impermanence of it, and then the inevitability of it. And I think toddlers really are much more, in that 2 to 5 group are much more focused on the non-functionality piece of it. So things not working anymore. And so I think that there's ways to explain it in that way, but there's also ways to reassure them that, like, if they're worried, and this happens for kids where they'll, let's say, a grandparent or an extended family member passes away, they become maybe preoccupied as to what will happen to their parent or themselves. And it's okay to say things like, I don't expect to die for a very long time. I'm taking good care of myself, and I'm eating well, and I do these things to take care of my body, and so do you. And so we're going to live we expect to live for a long time, and that's okay. Those are, again, your goal at that age is really to reassure, and then also just answer the questions really simply. And it's okay to be like, it sounds like you're worried about this. And again, they won't often need a whole in-depth explanation at that age. I think keeping it very present focused, and we're taking care of ourselves, or in the case of the person who has the great grandmother, I think, if it is important for you to bring them to see her, to just sort of explain it as it is in the current moment, rather than trying to extrapolate too far ahead, because I think that will be too hard for them. I know that was a little rambling, but I hope I covered a couple of questions in that popped up, because that age group I can see came up a few times in the questions.
Yeah.
And follow their lead. I'm so sorry, Susan. I didn't mean to. You will follow their lead. Again, so much about it, and I can't keep saying this enough, is really creating the space to acknowledge that it's a little uncomfortable. It's okay to say, I'm having trouble finding my words. I'm trying to find a good way to say this or express this. And that's a really important question. And again, these are not things we walk around prepared to answer. They catch us off guard. But they often don't need the level of I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but it's not often it's fraught with as much angst as when an adult would ask that question. It's kids are at that age where they do a lot of whys and how comes and this and that, and it's okay to just answer it simply and directly and very present focused. They're not necessarily, especially for the young ones, able to kind of look too far ahead more than the immediate. I'm sorry, Susan, go ahead. I apologize about that.
That's okay. We need to wrap up, so I want to be mindful of people's time.
Yeah.
I'm going to put the question again that I put up, because we're wrapping up. I would love to have people who are still on this call just give us one sentence. What's the one thing that you're walking away from tonight's event? So if there's one thing that you learned, one thing that you felt, one thing that helped you, let us know what that is. And take a minute, please, Preeti, to tell us about the Child and Family Institute Relief Fund.
Sure. It's so the Child and Family Institute, which is an organization that I'm part of, we are have developed a nonprofit arm called the Weissman Children's Foundation. Our director has that is allowing us to provide sliding scale, low fee patients to people, mental health services to people in need. This was a program that really was fast forwarded because of the pandemic, because so many people of all ages, adults and kids alike, were in need of mental health support. And as we know, it's not easy to access always. And as we are a private group, the goal of this was to really try to reach a broader range of individuals. We've made some wonderful partnerships with some community organizations to facilitate referrals and support so that we can try to get mental health services to the community that is in need of it. And also build relationships, because it's not just about the access, but it's also about building trust as well. You know, there are lots of populations and groups of people that understandably do not trust, you know, the healthcare and specifically mental health care systems. And so a lot of it has also been our work, also in training, in doing a lot of DEI training, so that we are creating an environment where we can also build trust with people who may feel that they have been not well served by mental health services and organizations in the past. So it's not just about the access, but also about building the bridges for that.
That's awesome. So we're going to send out a link to all the different resources. We have a lot, as you can tell, I'm fairly passionate about this. We have a lot on dealing with deaf and children in deaf, and we also have a cancer group, a cancer warriors group, and other illnesses. If we have a grandparents group, if you want to get on that. If you're not a member of Parksville Parents, parksvilleparents.com, there's a little join button. Gabrielle, it's always fabulous to work with you on these things. It's, you know, if you have not been to Greenwood Cemetery, it is beautiful. It is wonderful. It's a place in my mind, it's a place of healing. So do you want to talk just a half a second about Rachel and what she can help you with or help us with?
Yeah, Rachel's our director of education. We've been kind of brainstorming a lot of things for 2023. She's brought so many wonderful students onto our grounds. So I've witnessed myself some pretty neat conversations while the kids are among the tombstones, learning about the environment and this, you know, all of the beautiful architecture here and things like that. But thank you so much for coming. Death education, you know, started here pretty small. We're ramping up for 2023. Hope to have many more programs like this. For all of you that donated, thank you so much, because that helps me bring in wonderful speakers like we had here tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. So check out our website. We're going to be launching our winter 2023 programs in just a few weeks. So keep updated, join our, you know, email newsletter list, and until next time.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And thank you guys for organizing this. Parksville Parents in Greenwood, appreciate having the opportunity to join you again this year.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye, everybody.